it was funny. I was lying down this morning with Asher. I was getting him up. And so I always get into bed with him for a little bit when we're getting him up in the morning. And I had an itch. And I noticed when I was scratching the itch that I always have to go an even number in each direction when I itch something.
Really?
And it was the first time I developed that compulsion a long, long time ago and thought, oh, if I don't itch it in this correct way, something bad's going to happen. Because everything in my life for a long period of time had to be in even numbers. And if anything was in odd numbers, down to like how many times I would spit when I was brushing my teeth. It had to be an even number.
And you don't do that anymore?
That one I don't do, but it's interesting to notice ones that I still do that I think were mostly just out of habit. I was itching my chest going, oh, that's right. I had just had to do that 8 times. And so then I did it a 9th time in the wrong direction.
Wait, so what are you supposed to do in those moments?
I think we're supposed to, I think we're supposed to challenge the compulsion, right? So
did you stop?
Yeah. So if I do it, I had done it in even number and went, oh my God, I didn't realize I'd do that. And so then I did it an odd number of times and just exposed myself to the anxiety that brought, which wasn't.
Oh, I missed that. Sorry. I zoned out when you were sharing that. I missed that part.
Here I am pouring my heart out. You're not even listening.
I'm Alicia.
And I'm Liam. We both have OCD. And instead of spiraling alone, we decided to turn our symptoms into a podcast. You're welcome.
Here, we overshare real stories, laugh through the anxiety, and talk to actual experts who can explain why your brain keeps asking, what if I accidentally marry my cousin?
Whether your thing is hand washing, mental rituals, or just silently panicking during normal conversations, congrats. You have found your people.
This is a safe place. Unless you're an intrusive thought, in which case, get in line, buddy. We're booked.
So grab a weighted blanket, cancel your plans for the 5th time, and let's dive in. This is the OCD Confessional.
And yes, we did check this recording 4 times before uploading it.
Today's guest is Liz McIngvale, or Dr. Liz OCD on Instagram. She is a nationally recognized OCD expert, clinician, researcher, and advocate, and the director of the OCD Institute of Houston. She also serves on the board of the International OCD Foundation and founded both the Peace of Mind Foundation and OCDchallenge.org. Liz was diagnosed with OCD at a young age herself, and she brings both lived experience and deep clinical knowledge into her work. Her focus is on evidence-based treatment, reducing stigma, and helping people truly recover, not just cope. So Liz, thank you so much for joining us here on the OCD Confessional.
Thank you. I'm so excited. Yeah, really looking forward to the conversation and being here.
We like to start with a confession. And I know you've got some lived experience with OCD. Can you take us back to a moment in your life when OCD reared its head?
Oh man, I have so many moments. I can take you back to like decades or years if you want. But right before I went to residential treatment, so when I was about 14, my OCD this is certainly when it was at its peak. I was dealing with kind of every subtype at once. So harm, scrupulosity, sexual intrusive thoughts, kind of you name it, counting, checking, all the things. And I was at a place where showers were taking 6 to 8 hours. All of my clothing was contaminated for different reasons, or it felt like contaminated, not necessarily germ contamination, but it could also have been like something is the color red and black. So that's the color of the devil and I won't go to heaven or my family won't go to heaven, or this thing touched this thing that somebody else, a memory that made something emotionally contaminated. And if I wear it, something bad's going to happen. And so at the time, my sister is she was probably like a foot taller than me back then. And she also wore shoes that were probably 5 sizes bigger than mine. But my OCD, everything was contaminated. There was one pair of Gap jeans I could wear and one tan Gap shirt. And then I would wear my sister's Doc Martens, which were huge on me, without the laces. Because I remember the laces back then had some different brown colors in them that triggered me. And it just was I feel like that was such a time in my life where OCD was really visible on the outside. I think there's so many of us who live with OCD or who are currently living with OCD where a lot of your OCD can be hidden, right? Many of you, I'm sure we'll talk about this today, right? People go misdiagnosed or undiagnosed for years because mental illness is something that isn't always visible from the outside, and then there is a point sometimes for us where it is. And I feel like that's a really big memory for me of being at this stage in my life where every day, right? You could just look at me and tell something was really wrong. And it wasn't just the way I was dressing, but it was also I was going back and forth through doorways and praying and thresholds and like dropping to my knees and saying these prayers and doing all of these behaviors that from the outside it was so visible and that I couldn't deny how bad I was struggling, right? Everybody could see it at that point in my life. And I just was at a point where I had started to accept that as being my norm. I think so many of us, we don't know any different. We don't think we can get better. I, at that point, had been to multiple providers and had just not gotten treatment, not gotten effective treatment. And so I really believed that this was my life and that I would have to learn to live like this. I mean, I remember a point in my life where walking would take hours because I would go back and forth over cracks and thresholds and all the things until I had a good thought. And so my family would literally make me put sunglasses on and close my eyes and lead me as if I was blind because it was the only way we could get somewhere in a certain amount of time. Otherwise, we were hours upon hours in a parking lot trying to make it. I'm crying, they're exhausted, they're frustrated. And I just think it's such a testament to OCD being a disorder that is so fascinating because it can show up in so many different ways for different people. It can be invisible, it can be totally visible. And those are some of the moments that really stick out in my own life.
They were walking you as if you were a blind person? Like, would they
Oh, yeah.
carry you so you didn't hit the cracks and stuff?
No, I would close my eyes. So my mom would put sunglasses on me. I would close my eyes and just like literally like be hand in hand, arm in arm, and I would just let them lead me sort of thing. Because if I saw the cracks, I didn't have any control over not going back at that point, right? I hadn't had good treatment. And it was just the only way we could function. It's interesting because I think so many times people think, man, family members enable, and my mom always would say, she'd say, yeah, we did enable because I had other kids and we
Yeah.
have businesses and like we need to do stuff. So I had to enable my kid in different ways. My mom would like lay towels from the door, our back door to our car door because we had pavers on our driveway. And she would lay down towels so that I could like make it to the back door without getting stuck over these pavers for hours on end. And she's like, yeah, I know it's enabling, but also it's like 9 p.m. and we need to go to sleep in our household. So
God.
yeah,
You also
just all the
didn't know it
things.
was OCD at the time. And were you seeing
You
anyone
know,
for it?
so I grew up here in Houston, Texas, largest medical center in the world. And we were lucky enough that I got diagnosed pretty early with OCD. I got diagnosed around age 12. My symptoms were pretty typical OCD symptoms. Like they didn't know all of the stuff going on, sexual intrusive thoughts and harm, but they knew about the contamination and other things that allowed me to get a good diagnosis. The problem is that there was no good providers. Even here in Houston, no one understood OCD. No one understood OCD treatment. And so, yes, I had a diagnosis, but we didn't know what to do with that. And so it wasn't like it was helpful.
You didn't get ERP right away in that case
No.
then.
No.
So, what did they do for you? I'm curious how they approached this.
They put
Oh
glasses
my
on
God.
her and they no,
That's how my parents approached it. I remember, so it's interesting because I remember going to a therapist here in town and she would make me play the game life with her. And I will never forget, you would like cross the bridge in life or whatever you do in these games. And she would say, how does that make you feel? And I will never forget going to my mom and saying, Mom, this is what she's doing. Like, this is a complete waste of our time. Like I don't need to go to therapy to play the game life and be asked how I feel. Like I feel terrible. I'm struggling. Are you going to help me? Like I don't feel good. Like, but the bridge on the board game has nothing to do with how I feel. So, they were, I think most clinicians, I have a lot of thoughts on clinicians that I'm happy to share, but I think most clinicians are well intended. I think the problem is that there's not a lot of ethical guidelines and standards around mental health clinicians and the treatment they provide. So if you are a medical provider, it's malpractice if you're doing incorrect treatment, right? But when it comes to mental health, that doesn't really exist. So somebody can be doing talk therapy, they can be doing play therapy, which we know none of those are effective for OCD treatment, and nothing's going to happen. And so my parents had no idea. Like they didn't know what type of treatment I needed. They just knew find a mental health provider. And if they say they can help my kid, we should trust them because what else would they have known?
You had this religious scrupulosity. You said that you had intrusive sexual thoughts as well. Were you able to open up to your parents or a provider about that, or was that just totally internal and you were trying to struggle through that?
It was internal for a long time, and then I did open up to my mom about it, and she shared a lot with my dad, but I didn't share it directly with my dad. My mom did, but I did open up to my mom and told her about it, and she did what any typical parent does, which is like, "Oh, well, like those are weird thoughts. You know, they don't mean anything. They're not a big deal. You don't need to worry about them." But she didn't know what to do with them either. But she did know that they were there, and I was comfortable and safe enough to talk to her about it.
Was it a religious household that you grew up in? And do you think that that maybe accentuated the problem? Like, oh my God, this is a sin or any of that?
Yeah, no, my dad's Catholic, my mom's Methodist, and my parents were actually pretty like, you can kind of like choose and, go to mass with dad if you want, or, go to church on your own. I actually like went to my own church. I was non-denominational and really like participated in I am, but like as a Christian in my own faith, both back then and now. No, I mean, what we know is that OCD is going to attack anything. So if it wouldn't have been faith, it would have been something else. I don't think I think that, of course, because we were a faith based family and because I'm a Christian, that's why OCD attacked that. OCD only really attacks the things that are important to us. But if it wouldn't have been faith, it would have attacked something else.
How old were you when you started ERP?
So we kept searching. We would go from provider to provider. And we finally did find a provider here in Houston. I was probably about 14 at the time who was able to say, like, this is clearly OCD. She needs ERP. My mom was like, great. Like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know anything about that. And so this provider was great in the sense that she at least had a decent, like, basic understanding of ERP. However, she had never seen a case like mine. My OCD was, I mean, Y box, like, high as it can be. I was, struggling all day. The only relief I ever got when I was asleep and ritualizing nonstop. And so she honestly was the best provider we ever saw, just because of, I believe, like how ethical she was at the time. Other providers were great too, but like at that timing where she was able to say to my mom, I know this is OCD. I know she needs ERP, but like I've never seen a case this severe and she needs something else. And that was actually really important for my parents to hear so that they didn't think, oh, ERP is not going to work or my kid can't get better. They were able to understand that this isn't the right level of care. Like she's way too severe to be seeing someone outpatient 45 minutes a week doing ERP. Like she's not going to get better like that. The problem is there was not other options. So, I think my parents were really excited to understand that, oh, she needs something different. Okay. But then it's like, okay, well, what does she need and how do we get her that? And it's like, don't really know, like good luck. And so my dad serendipitously used to read the Houston Chronicle, our newspaper here in town, every morning. And one morning he opened the Houston Chronicle, and in the Chronicle there was a little excerpt about the McIngvale Clinic, which is an inpatient facility that was at the time it was in Topeka, Kansas, but that a lot of Houstonians were trying to fundraise to bring it to Houston. And as my dad was reading that excerpt, he read in there that they had an OCD program. And that is how he got on the phone with them. And shortly after February 5th of 2002, so I just turned 15, my parents took me to the McIngvale Clinic, which at the time was in Topeka, Kansas. And that's when I did my first residential program for OCD and stayed for about 3 months. And that's when I really got effective, intensive ERP.
What did that look like, the ERP?
Yeah. It looks exactly what ERP is, which is, we sit down and we really want to understand, what are you avoiding? What are you most triggered by? What are your core fears? And then they really built what would ERP look like. So for me, it was things like I was listening to loop tapes. So like saying my intrusive thoughts and having to listen to them. I was wearing colors and clothes that I had been avoiding for years. I was reducing my shower routine, right? No longer able to do those 6 and 8 hour showers, and then eventually doing active contamination exposures. But it was really, what are all the things you're afraid of and how do we slowly start targeting that? And the difference is that I was with a provider and a team who had seen the most severe cases, so I wasn't their most severe case. They had treated people like me and treated them very successfully. And I think that's what, like, as a clinician and advocate now bothers me the most is that there is such an amazing effective intervention for OCD treatment that works for so many people. but it's so hard to find it, right? It is so hard to get it. And it's so hard to get good ERP. Like you can get ERP. A lot of providers say they treat ERP or say they do ERP. But yeah, it's
You
no,
recently
like,
did a video on this and you were really bugged about how when people say the ERPs failed them, and your response was the willingness in feeling uncomfortable isn't there.
yeah.
The patient has to really dedicate to this, be willing to feel uncomfortable, and that's with both parties, the clinician and the patient, right?
Kind of going back before we started this podcast, Liam was like, your dad's a mattress Mac. And I was like, yeah, I live in Houston. And so my dad it's funny that people are like, how do people know who a furniture salesman is? My dad runs a furniture store here in town, but does a lot of philanthropy and different work. And I say that because my parents have, they have a good societal kind of whatever you want to say, but like influence and impact here in Houston. And so when I first got sick after I got treatment the first time at Menninger, my dad was really big on like, we're going to talk about this. We're going to share this story. We're going to see if we can help other people like get to treatment sooner. Like there was zero stigma, zero kind of wanting to hide that. And at the time, it was actually right after the tsunami. And there was a big event in Houston called the Bush Clinton Tsunami Fund. It was when parties used to actually come together and work together. I know that's shocking for us nowadays, but it was a great fundraising event. And at the time, that is when my dad started like talking openly, publicly about our family's journey with OCD. And I became the national spokesperson for the International Foundation for OCD at age 17. And I was very young, but like doing all these national campaigns and going on national shows and talking about my story and really kind of speaking out about it. And at the time, it's interesting because I tell people this that I was speaking about my own story and my journey, but I wasn't really doing ERP all the way back then. I was doing it a little bit, like I was doing ERP to be functional, but I wasn't using ERP to get to freedom. I was still holding on. I was still not really wanting to feel discomfort. I was still, hoping that I could still feel better, still hold on to some of these safety behaviors or rituals. And so I for the first 10 years of like after my first treatment experience, but for the first 10 years of really when I was doing advocacy and even starting my career, right, going back to school and getting my PhD, doing these things, I was still struggling tremendously. And I was one of those people that individuals would have said, see, ERP doesn't really work for her, right? Because she's been doing ERP, but she's still really struggling. And that is why this is such a big hill for me to talk about is it's so important for people to know that like I actually wasn't doing ERP all the way. So it wasn't ERP that wasn't working. It was my willingness, right? I was holding on. I also think there's a lot of reasons for that. When I was first diagnosed, which was, 20 plus years ago, we really felt like OCD is a chronic disabling mental health disorder that you'll have for the rest of your life. And that is the language we used. It is the language that people, spoke about very broadly. And I think it was very detrimental to patient outcomes. I think it was a huge disservice because all of us heard that as, well, I'm always going to struggle. This is an incurable condition. I'm always going to have OCD. I'm always going to be triggered. So if I can use ERP to be more functional, that's successful treatment, right? That's what we thought successful treatment was. And so, of course, you used ERP to become more functional, but you didn't really use it for freedom. That's how I thought of and understood treatment was, oh, it can get you functional, but you're always going to struggle. And so I held on because I thought that was the norm. I didn't think I could actually get freedom with ERP. And so what I've seen over the last, and even my parents, like they still, by the way, are in that mindset. My dad and I do speeches together all the time. We do a lot of advocacy around mental health and OCD. And my dad will talk openly about like, my daughter will always struggle with OCD. And I'm like, not really anymore. Let's like reframe your language, but like it's harder to change somebody who's 70, but, and the way they speak about things. But, it's like, that was like how I understood treatment 20 years ago and how we understood it as clinicians was you're always going to struggle. We're going to teach you skills and teach you how to use ERP every day for the rest of your life. And so ERP got this really bad rap that like the goal of ERP is just to learn how to be okay always being uncomfortable, or that like ERP is going to just get you more functional, or even worse, like ERP is going to teach you how to be okay with uncertainty for the rest of your life. And it's like, well, not really. ERP should actually get you to freedom. It should actually allow you to have trust in yourself. It should allow you to know that those were intrusive thoughts. Like, do you think I would have done treatment if somebody said treatment for you, Liz, is you need to be okay with being a pedophile or you need to be okay with not going to heaven. Like, no, those are the things that are most important to me in my life. Like, I wouldn't say, great, sign me up. Right now, yes, during treatment, I needed to let go of knowing because I would have stayed stuck. But I can tell you with 100% confidence now, like, I'm not a pedophile. I believe fully I'm going to heaven. I trust myself, right? Like, I'm able to use ERP to get confidence, to get clarity. And that's the goal of it. But I've been doing advocacy and clinical work now for a long time. And here's what I'll say. I have never yet seen one case where ERP didn't work for OCD if the person was truly engaging in ERP. I've never seen it.
I want to dig in a bit more on this question of whether it's curable.
Good, let's do it. Let's make a circle. That's my favorite thing.
I would say I'm kind of in between these two positions where I totally understand the perspective that this will be some part of you, even if small, for the rest of your life, because it's kind of the way I feel about it. You know, I've come a long way from discovering I have OCD, having treatment, using a lot of different tools to improve my life. I'm on medication as well. And I have reduced my symptoms by, I would say, 85 to 90%.
Awesome.
Now, there's a 10 to 15% that is still with me.
Yep.
And to some extent, I tend to think it's healthier for my mindset to accept that there will always be some of it with me. Because not that it's a lack of hope or killing my hope. It's more that when it does show up, I don't want to be devastated that I thought I was cured. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it makes total sense. But I'm going to fight you on it a little.
Okay.
In a healthy way. I'm going to debate you. Here's what I'll say. Individuals with OCD, myself included, right? Our brain is stickier. So yes, you're right. For the rest of my life, I probably am going to have a little bit more sticky, intrusive thoughts than someone like my husband who doesn't have OCD. And I am 100% predisposed to OCD, right? We know that no matter what. It's neurobiological. We're born with OCD. We know that. Like our predisposition is there. It can't go away. However, if we address all of our OCD, so like I don't want us to hold on to that last 10 to 15%. And trust me, Liam, I lived in that place for a decade or 15 years where I held on to 20, 25, 30%, right? The problem with that is twofold. Number one, OCD is similar to cancer. And if we leave a little bit there, it will metastasize. And I don't think you would go to your oncologist and say, if you get as much as possible, but you leave 15%, I'm okay with that. Right? You wouldn't say that. You would say, I want you to get it all. I want you to get everything. Know it's gone. Go even a little bit deeper so that I have no concerns. Right? We really want to get to like the core and get to freedom. With that being said, I think the cure language, first of all, I would have fought anyone on this. Like I actually did. You can probably find old videos of myself where it was like OCD is not curable. Like that's really detrimental when people say that. But I'm not so sure that's the case. And here's why. I think that one of the biggest problems right now, let me say the blessing first. It is so amazing that people are talking about OCD, right? Like 20 years ago when I was the national spokesperson, nobody ever talked about OCD. Nobody said anything about it. We'd have hundreds of advocates. We've built advocate programs. We're doing a podcast on it, right? Like this is amazing. Like that is amazing. That breaks stigma. It increases education. There's so many things that we all know how valuable that is. And I do think that because a lot of individuals, right, like are still living with their OCD and advocating, there does become this message sometimes for people with OCD that I am always going to struggle and I have to accept that. And the problem with that is that if you're watching people who are like, I went to treatment and like, this is where my OCD still shows up. And that's like maybe a part of their platform or a part of their messaging and their story, but they're not clear about here's why it still shows up. Here's the ERP I haven't been willing to do yet. Or here's right. Because if you can at least just say, hey, I still have 20%, but here's why. Here's what I know I need to do, but I'm not willing to do that yet. Or I'm struggling to do that. Or this is where I'm getting stuck. That's great. That's totally different than hey, I know that I will always have 10 or 15%. My answer would be like, why? Like Liam, I would say to you, I'd be like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the 10 or 15%. Like, what's left and why aren't we going to address it? Like, why do we want to hold on to that?
Well, let me say that I am going back into therapy.
Yay.
To address the 10 to 15% and to stop it from metastasizing, as you're saying. But
I have this rule that I believe, sorry to interrupt, is I think that most people, when you first get ERP and you get a really good dose of ERP, most people look at recovery as like if they're 70% better. I have this like 70-30 rule. And I find, this is what I found, that most individuals, when they get to 70% better, it's amazing. And it is. I mean, listen, like when OCD took up 100% of your life, you have 70% back. That was the point in my life when I got a PhD, I started my career, I built my life, like all these things were happening, but I was still struggling, right? I was still holding on to or engaging with 10, 20, 30% of my OCD. But that's normal. What I always tell people is actually what I would expect is that you go to treatment, you get about 70% better, then you go live your life. And you can do all these things you couldn't do, and it's amazing, and you're excited about it, and you start making your life bigger because OCD is smaller. And then there will come a point where that 10% or 30%, whatever's left, starts to really aggravate you. And you're like, okay, like at first you were excited about it, you were thrilled, but now you're like, oh no, like I am going to address this remaining percentage, right? Because I have to, like, I don't want this to keep getting bigger. And then you re-engage with ERP. And sometimes you go back to treatment, but a lot of times, by the way, you don't need to go back to treatment because you know what to do. It's just really leaning in and doing the ERP for those remaining things.
Yeah, I guess where is the harm in thinking that you can get 99% better, Liam? I mean, where's the harm in thinking that?
So I worry about
worry. Here's his worry.
Exactly. I do worry about the letdown, the disappointment you might experience if you say, my goal is perfection, because that's an unusual thing. It's rare.
Yeah.
Perfection
I never
is rare.
said, I don't want us to go perfection, right? Because now we're black and white thinking. If it's like I'm either cured, I'm all
very
or
good
none,
at black and
right?
white thinking,
Yes,
Liz. That's
most of us
specialty.
are. Yeah, that's totally fair. I'm saying I no longer would meet diagnostic criteria for OCD, right? Which so typically that's about a Y box of 16 and above is like, that's typically our clinical cutoff roughly, right? When we're like, I no longer would meet criteria. That doesn't mean I never have an intrusive thought. It doesn't mean I never don't give in to an intrusive thought. Like sometimes on rare occasions I do, but the amount that I do, the intrusive, like my last really sticky intrusive thought was probably 2 years ago. My last really sticky rituals was 3.5 years ago that like I can remember that day of like, holy, and then guess what? That day was awful, but I still re-engaged in ERP and didn't let it snowball. And like I had to lean in, but like, it doesn't mean I don't have any OCD ever. That's not what I'm saying, but I wouldn't meet criteria, right? Look at my husband, like he doesn't have any OCD, but my God, if we have a flight, you would think that the flight is happening in 10 minutes when it's, 8 hours in advance because of his anxiety. But like to him, it's not disruptive. We don't like it's, and so no one's saying like you would have zero because like most people actually have some OC symptoms. Most people don't have none. They're no longer disruptive in our life. And so they no longer meet diagnostic criteria.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to define it in that case. And in that case, I totally agree. So good. See, we found
our common ground. So the point of it all is just don't sell yourself short. Don't have a mentality of, hey, because I have an OCD diagnosis, I'm always going to struggle with OCD and like it's always going to be a part of my life. Because then we're really kind of saying, all right, OCD, come on for my journey and, be a part of who I am. And I don't ever want anyone, especially my patients, I don't want your OCD to start to mesh with your identity, right? We do not want you to start to think OCD is a part of
right
you.
now.
Yeah, we got to work on that.
So I'm struggling with that. Let's talk about that really fast because doing this podcast is obviously new for me. Finding out I have OCD is new for me. And I'm really hesitant to talk about it on social media from my own personal compulsions, whatever I do, my mental stuff, because I don't want that to be my identity. I want to talk about it and I want to bring awareness to it, but it is not who I am. And I'm trying to almost push it away So then talking about it feels like I'm bringing it to life. And it's something that I'm like, even this morning, it was so loud. I'm so in my head. I am replaying things over and over and over again, telling myself that, all these things. And I'm like, okay, I'm in it. It's not who I am. I want to bring awareness to it, but I'm also really struggling with keeping my identity separate from the OCD. And obviously that's going to be therapy and ERP and whatnot. But how do you speak up about it? How do you share it without making it your identity? And how do you keep it two separate?
It's such a good,
because this is your work now.
Question.
I mean, for you, this is what this is what it's. So do you ever really escape it?
I do. So actually, I 100% do. And I'll tell you how. Number one, I don't talk about OCD when I'm not at work or on a work call. Unless someone's asking me and I'm doing some education, right? But like, it's not a part of conversations with my husband or my kids, really. I mean, of course, I have kids. So we talk about anxiety and exposure work because I have to teach them exposures at a young age because I believe so much in them. But we're not talking about my OCD. We're not talking about things I'm triggered by because I'm not triggered by things anymore. Right. So I think that first of all, Alicia, like give yourself grace that you're just starting therapy. So for you, like it's still, you're not like totally there yet at that place where you can really separate yourself or be able to not have it be a part of your identity because it is right now a big part of your life. But what I don't want to happen is I don't want people to assume or be okay with it being a part of their life forever. Right. Like if you're choosing for it to be a part of your life because you're going to be on a podcast and you're going to be an educator and you're going to be sharing about it. Great. That's an amazing way for you to have OCD be a part of your life or your career or what you do. But that doesn't mean it's a part of your identity. Does that make sense? Like we don't want OCD to be a part of us, like because now we're basically inviting it too and saying, yeah, like OCD is always going to be a part of my decision making. It's always going to be a part of my life or like things that I do. And none of us would want that because there is nothing good that comes from OCD.
Yeah, I guess that's why when we come on here and share our confessions, I'm like, we're choosing to talk about it? Does that make it worse and living in it?
I think you're doing a little magical thinking there.
Yeah. Well, it's the opposite, right? Like if you don't want to talk about it, that's actually more the reason to talk about it because if part of you're not talking about it is because it's making you anxious, right? It's making you triggered. And that is the ERP for you. ERP is going to be being able to like say your intrusive thoughts and do nothing about them. And, obviously as long as you're not ritualizing. And so that's very different, but I'm saying like here's an example. I see a lot of individuals that will say things like, I'm always going to live with OCD. I'm always going to have these intrusive thoughts. And I just have to learn how to like get up and still go to school despite the fact that all my thoughts are there. That's fine right now if you're just starting treatment. But if you've been in treatment, that's not how you have to live your life. You do not have to live your life thinking that you're always going to have these loud intrusive thoughts and that you always have to push through and that you have to like fight really hard. We haven't really done ERP yet. ERP should get people freedom. It should get you relief. It should make it, this is my favorite like goal of ERP. ERP should get you to a place where you have thoughts, but you never have triggers. Like imagine that. Imagine if you have thoughts, but they're not triggers.
Right.
That's
it can
freedom.
be as fleeting as it is for other people.
I asked my husband the other day, I was like, do you ever have any like weird thoughts about our kids? He's like, yeah, all the time. I was like, oh, okay, just making sure, right? But like, everybody has thoughts. This is not like they did a research study once where they had people record intrusive thoughts into microphones, people with OCD, people without, and the clinician separated out who had OCD, who didn't. They couldn't separate it out. Everybody has weird thoughts. That's not the problem is not our thoughts. The problem is the distress, the anxiety that's attached to them that makes our thoughts be a trigger. And that is what ERP is going to get you relief from. Because again, if you're at a place in your life where you don't have any triggers, you don't have OCD.
Right. You might have the thought of stabbing your dog, but you don't then spend the rest of the day thinking about it and ritualizing in order to stop it from happening or whatever.
We'll be right back. But first, a message from our sponsor. The same distressing, unwanted thoughts keep playing over and over in your mind. The same rituals keep eating up your time, holding you back from enjoying your life. You've tried talk therapy before and spent session after session diving into those thoughts, trying to understand them, trying to fix them, but somehow they just get worse. And the shame piles on because you think, why isn't this working? What's wrong with me? If this sounds familiar, here's what you need to know. You're not the problem. You're experiencing something that a lot of people with OCD experience. Getting your life back is possible because OCD is highly treatable. It just requires a completely different approach than other mental health conditions. In fact, standard talk therapy often makes OCD worse because it encourages you to analyze those intrusive thoughts or try to replace them with positive ones. But with OCD, the more attention you give the thoughts, the stickier they become. That's where NoCD comes in. NoCD provides virtual therapy designed specifically for OCD. Every single one of their therapists is extensively trained in a type of therapy called ERP, or exposure and response prevention, which is the most effective treatment available for OCD. And they get the training from world-renowned OCD experts so they truly understand what you're dealing with, even the stuff that feels impossible to say out loud. In live, face-to-face virtual sessions, your NoCD therapist will teach you how to take the power away from intrusive thoughts so you can live the life that you want to live. And between sessions, you'll be able to message your therapist anytime, join dozens of life support groups, and continue your progress with other expert-developed therapy tools. NoCD is also covered by insurance for over 138 million Americans, and their team makes it really simple to get started. Visit nocd.com and book a free 15-minute call. That's nocd.com to learn more and talk to someone who can help, because you deserve treatment that actually works for OCD.
So I just want to dig a bit into your history as a clinician now, because you went through ERP, you did residential treatment, and at some point you did the ultimate psychologist thing, which is to do me search. You dug deep onto the thing that had tormented you, and now are spending your life trying to help other people going through that. So when did you decide, all right, I'm devoting my career to OCD and how to treat it?
When I was 15, as soon as I got treatment and my life had been changed and saved, I went from somebody who was very suicidal and never understood or could see how I would have a will to live again to somebody who could take 5-minute showers, wear whatever clothes I wanted, and do the little things in my life that OCD had taken away from me. I knew in that moment that I wanted to do for other people what clinicians had done for me. I had no idea what that looked like, but I knew at that moment. And that's why we started a lot of advocacy as a family. And then individually, I did back then. And then I had to start actually doing what that meant, which is going to school, which is a long journey. And so I did advocacy alongside going to school and then getting my clinical work, doing academic research, being in the different arenas, and then landing back where I am today, which is, my full circle life moment. I now run OCD Institute of Texas, which is the same residential program that was a part of McIngvale that I went to when I was 15. So I now get to run the same residential program that saved my life, 20 years ago. And I don't know, it puts it all into perspective. I'm not a believer that, none of us would wish OCD on our worst enemies. And I think that in life, we have to figure out how we can take pain and turn it into a purpose. And that's what I did. And I think for me, Dr. Janicki, who was one of our original kind of founders of ERP and started the first ever residential program, McLean's in Boston. And most of us that are clinicians have trained under Mike to some degree. Him and I talked a lot about this, but we're just such big believers that advocacy or clinical work, whatever it is after treatment, is that final leg. When you think about AA, for example, individuals who have substance use disorder and go through a 12-step program, the final step is becoming a sponsor, right? It's helping someone else, because there's something so profound about taking your pain and doing something with it, right? Doing something meaningful. And I just find time and time again that individuals across the board, but especially with OCD as well, that when you start doing something with it, whether it's advocacy, whether it's education, whether it's being a clinician, it doesn't matter what you're doing, it's not prescriptive.
Doing a
I think
podcast.
A podcast. Yeah, it keeps you accountable. It keeps you well. It also turns meaning into this terrible thing that no one would have wanted to have to go through.
Did you see the IOCDF white paper on?
Yes. Yeah. I helped edit. Yeah. Take a look at that.
Oh, you helped edit it. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. I'm on the board of directors for IOCDF. So I've been involved in the foundation for a really long time. So
yeah. So what is your take on the current state of OCD care in the country? You're a clinician. You run an institute that cares for a lot of people with this, but so many, a lot of people who listen to this podcast don't get treatment because they can't access it. They can't afford it. There isn't someone that does ERP near them. Like, what do we do with all this?
We keep doing what we're doing. You know, listen, when I started this work 20 plus years ago, people didn't know what the acronym OCD was. So we've come a really long way. And
I
I
had
think
someone comment on my video the other day. I did a video about OCD, and the guy was like, "Hey, can you tell us what OCD is? Why do you just keep using these acronyms?" I'm like, who doesn't know what OCD is?
Right. But I mean, truly, back then, nobody knew what OCD was 20 years ago, you know? And so I think that first and foremost, what I always tell people is like, we have come such a long way, right? And in every aspect, like people know what OCD is. Some people know what ERP is or know what CBT is or are talking about mental health treatment. None of that existed 20 years ago. Um, and so that's amazing. You know, nobody advocated for OCD. We have hundreds, if not thousands of advocates now. That's amazing. I think that the first thing I want to say is like we've come such a long way. So it's very exciting. And there is undoubtedly, all of us know that, see that, there is so much work to be done. And I think the work is going to take a community, but I don't think the real change is going to happen until we really get lobbying and government involved and we're able to set some regulations, right? So I think it's a tough thing because a lot of people don't want regulations, but at the same time, if there's not regulations around mental health treatment in the first line of treatment, that is what contributes to, in my opinion, that's a big piece of what contributes to people not getting good treatment sooner. Right. You think about like autism speaks and the work that was done for autism, obviously through government and then through treatment. It really made a difference in both the assessment of autism, but also in getting people to good evidence-based treatment for autism sooner, right? ABA, which is a great treatment for autism, is one of the most amazing interventions, but also very accessible because of the lobbying and work that was done and insurance covers it. Insurance doesn't want to cover ERP. They don't want to cover specialty care. And guess what? If you looked at our patients here at OCD Institute of Texas and any insurance panel would give me a chance to talk to them, they would see how much money they've wasted not just paying for OCD treatment up front. Right? Our patients, almost all of them, have been in inpatient hospitals, they've been in emergency rooms, they've tried other intensive programs, but none of them are OCD specific. So not only do they not help, they get worse. And it has cost the insurance companies so much more than if they would have just paid for specialty care up front. You know, and so I just think that I don't know, I just get so frustrated with the work that needs to be done and it feeling like a black hole. But at the same time, I'm very hopeful about where we're at now compared to where we were. When Mike Janicki did one of the last seminal articles of access to OCD treatment in the New England Journal of Medicine, it was in 2006, I believe. It was on average, it took 12 to 16 years for people to get effective treatment once they had been diagnosed, right? So we're talking about like you've been diagnosed and now it's 12 to 16 years. So I do think it's getting better. And I think that we need to be hopeful about that and excited about what it could become. But at the same time, I think that there's a lot of work to be done and there's a lot of us that have to come together. I think I have two other thoughts. Number one, we have to quit working in silos, right? All of us, whether we're doing education on podcasts or we're in government or we're a clinician or we're a researcher, we have to collaborate more and work together because change isn't going to happen with any one person typically. But then the second piece is we have to be able to show people that there is an amazing effective intervention. And if we can help people really understand how effective ERP is, which it is when it's done correctly and when it's done for the correct diagnosis, which is OCD, we will be able to get people more willing to pay for it and to, get them there. But here's the last thing I'll say. There actually is a lot of treatment available. And I tell you this because as somebody who's ran a nonprofit for many years, paying and subsidizing for individuals' treatment for OCD, and as somebody who now runs OCDI Texas, where we do sliding scale, great ERP treatment for free or very low cost. Guess what sessions are the hardest for us to get full?
I don't know.
The free ones. The free ones. And so I think that it's really important for us to understand that I think a lot of people think if we just have more ERP available or if there's more low cost options, that's going to fix the problem. But it actually isn't, right? Education has to happen. People need to be able to know what they're dealing with. They need to know what the correct intervention they're even looking for is. And that is all a part of, like, there's just a lot more that goes into who are the treatment seeking population. It's often like 70% white females. Those aren't the people who aren't accessing ERP, right? So how do we get education to the communities and individuals and people of color who we know have less access to effective mental health diagnosis and treatment? Like, so there's a lot that has to be done. It's a very complex thing, but it's real. Most people don't get to the right treatment. And if they did and they got there sooner, we would be doing amazing preventative treatment and care. And we would see the burden OCD has on society become much less. There's no doubt about it.
Do you think people can do ERP on their own without seeing somebody? Someone had made a comment the other day that we need to let people know that ERP is available and accessible to everybody, whether or not you have the money to seek therapy.
Yeah, I mean, there's some great self-help tools and resources. There's wonderful workbooks that people can use. So definitely, I mean, ERP is absolutely, it's a cognitive behavioral intervention. So it's an intervention that people can kind of teach themselves and do and engage with. I think that it depends on severity level. I don't think it's realistic for somebody with certain severity levels to think that they're going to be able to do that on their own and get better. I just think that they need support. It's the same with treatment, by the way. Somebody who's dealing with really severe OCD and people will say ERP doesn't work for them. It's like, well, does ERP not work or are they not in the right level of care? Because if they're going to ERP for 45 minutes once a week, but then they're going home and ritualizing for 10 hours a day, no outpatient ERP once a week is going to help that person. Like, they need much more support, right? That's why programs like ours exist, where there's day programs and programs where people live on site with us like they do here and they get intensive treatment. So there's a lot that goes into us understanding why ERP isn't working. And that's what my post was all about recently, is it isn't about me saying other interventions aren't useful, because they are for a lot of people, for a lot of different disorders. But instead of throwing ERP in the trash, can you stop and ask why it's not working?
You talked a bit about how your parents, after the fact, recognized that they had been reassuring you and kind of enabling your OCD or reinforcing it. So what advice would you have to a parent now who sees some of this in their kid? Maybe their kid has been diagnosed, maybe not. What are the best kind of strategies for handling that with a kid?
Yeah, I mean, I have a couple thoughts. My first thought, because one of the first questions I get all the time is, when do I know if we need to seek treatment? Like, when would I know if, and here's what I tell people. Every day I see people who say they wish they would have gotten treatment sooner. I have never in my life met somebody who said, oh, we went to treatment too early. So if you're wondering, if you're asking about it, please find a provider. Number 2, find a specialist. You need to find somebody who really specializes in ERP. And that doesn't mean they're on Psychology Today and they list ERP as a disorder they treat. That's not a specialist. A specialist is, where did they get trained? Where did they do their ERP training, and who supervised them? Right? Did they get years of training in intensive ERP? Have they been supervised by well-known ERP clinicians who we know that they really got that training and background, versus they just took an online course and they're now an ERP specialist, right? That's not what signifies somebody as being an ERP specialist. And so we want you to find the right provider. But I would tell parents, 2 things. If you want to do it on your own, I would recommend picking up Dr. Ellie Leibowitz's Space book. So, he does a great job of helping parents understand, and for those clinicians that are space trained and they can work with the parents without the kids, that he really helps parents see how we end up enabling anxiety and how we can, in a loving and compassionate way, start to set effective boundaries so that our children can approach anxiety, which is what we want to teach people, versus run from it.
We had Ellie on our show, and
yes.
Oh yeah, he was amazing.
He's the best. Yeah, we love Ellie so much. Yeah, all of us. He's so great. And so, but I think that there's great tools out there that if you want to, as a parent, just learn. And you may not have a child who has diagnosable OCD, but guess what? All your kids are going to have anxiety to different degrees. Maybe it's not diagnosable, but like, these school skills and tools are so useful. So I highly recommend his work and book. But then otherwise, find an OCD provider, find an ERP specialist and go to them and let them help guide you on how to set boundaries and what you should do and how you can remove accommodations and engage in good support. We always tell parents as a program here that our patients are coming right? Residential. All of our patients have an individual therapist, a family therapist, and a psychiatrist. But how do you have support? Support is validation plus confidence equals support, right? So I think a lot of parents think, oh man, if I'm no longer giving into their OCD, that feels really cruel. Now you want me to be mean or you want me to just ignore them. It's like, no, I don't want you to do that. I want you to do what you actually do for a toddler, right? You say something like, I know it's scary to ride a bike for the first time, and I can't wait to watch you be able to do this, right? I know you don't think you can make it past through these monkey bars, and it's going to be so exciting when you learn this new skill, right? Like it's what you do all the time. And so that it's about love and empathy. Like ERP, by the way, can be supportive and amazing. It doesn't have to be this like cruel, harsh treatment intervention that people have made it out to be.
Yeah. What was the toughest exposure you had to do in your life?
In my life, whew, that's hard, because I think that one of the ones I remember most vividly was sitting on the couch at Menninger wearing this yellow sweatshirt that was super triggering and contaminated and listening to this loop tape full of intrusive thoughts around scrupulosity. And I remember that as being just so overwhelming and triggering. In the scheme of things, it probably wasn't my highest level exposure, but it was one of my first exposures. And so what I think is important for us to note is that while, yeah, we're going to rank your exposures, we should always be starting with the lowest, and kind of working our way up. You should find that by the time you get to your harder ones, they're actually not as hard as even those first ones because you've built that muscle. You've built distress tolerance skills. You've built the muscle of how to do ERP. You know what it's like. And so those are probably, I would say that's probably one of my most like vivid memories as far as like, it was one of my early on first exposures at residential treatment. And I remember it being so terrifying. Do I think it was on the top of my hierarchy? Probably not.
Do you wear yellow sweaters now, ever?
Oh, yeah. I can wear any color. I can wear red and black together. I can, not worry about the number 6 and all the things. It's amazing.
What we don't talk about on here, and I want to chat a little bit about, is ICBT. The difference between ERP and ICBT, because there's a lot of people who have walked away from ERP. It doesn't work. I'm not willing to do that. But ICBT, can you explain a little bit of the difference and why someone might give up on ERP?
So ICBT is inference-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's like a protocol that's more about how can we help you rely on your senses and trust yourself again versus having to do active exposures. I have never met anybody with OCD who's gotten better without doing some sort of exposures. Living life is an exposure for patients with OCD. So yeah. I'm struggling to understand what that would look like. Here's what we know. ICBT can be an adjunctive treatment, right? If you want, like ERP doesn't work, you feel like you want to give that a shot. What we know research-wise is that ERP is the most evidence-based gold standard treatment for OCD. ICBT does not have the research background. It does not have the research studies and like the data for us to be able to say it is evidence-based like ERP is. So I, as a clinician and as a advocate, cannot ethically say, hey, try these other interventions first. If anyone wants to go to the International OCD Foundation's website, iocdf.org, we have a great treatment recommendations page that we're always updating that shows like evidence and all the different interventions, right? What is ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy? Most people do ACT with ERP. It's a great way that it can be integrated and it's very effective. And so we lay all that out, and that is really backed by the scientific advisory board through IOCDF, that you can feel really good that it's backed by sound research and data versus someone's personal experience.
What's one message you'd want every listener to walk away from this conversation with?
Yeah, fight for freedom, not functioning. It's my soapbox for this decade of my life, is that we don't have to settle to learn to function with OCD. You can get to a place of freedom. And I just hope that everybody can experience that because I know it's possible. And I'm not saying that flippantly or just as a clinician. I'm saying it as somebody who for 2 decades in my life, I didn't think that would be possible. And now I know it is. And I want everyone to have that because people deserve it.
So you would say that you have freedom now. Does it
100%.
ever creep back in?
Yeah, I mean, the other night, 2 nights ago, I was driving home late at night. It was dark and I hit a bump and I had an intrusive thought, right? Like it still shows up here and there of like, I wonder if someone without OCD would have had that same thought, or maybe if they did, it wouldn't have had. Mine had a little anxiety. But the difference again is that I can have thoughts that sometimes have anxiety attached, but they don't become a trigger. I'm not responding to them, right? I know what to do right away so that they never become big or profound or a fear in my life again.
I did see a story yesterday that a pedestrian was hit in Houston and they don't know who hit him.
Oh,
I didn't
Liam.
know that.
Just
Oh, yeah.
No, he's trying to
Trying to trigger me. Can you see I'm not even triggered? I'm like, oh, didn't hear about that. You know, usually in the past I'd be like sweating and like, what? Yeah, had no idea. Actually, wouldn't surprise me though. Houston is like full of crazy drivers. So
That's so funny.
I could
Oh.
talk to you forever. I really love your perspective. I feel like you've brought me over to your side a bit on the curing
yay.
On the belief.
I'll keep getting you there. I'll keep
Can't
checking
say
in.
cure because like you said, I mean, that's a promise that we can't keep. If you started going out telling everyone that OCD was curable, everyone's OCD manifests in different ways. Lifestyle plays a role, stress induced. You just had a thought the other day. It's like if you tell me that I can be cured of OCD and then I run over and have that thought, then I'm like, oh, liar. Like I'm not cured. I'm still
So I think though, Alicia, that's the point that's important to talk about is that why are we saying if we have a thought that has a little anxiety, then that means it's OCD again, like it's like an OCD diagnosis again, right?
I guess because
Like-
I'm so far from there that it's hard for me to wrap my head around having I'm just in
And
the
that's-
thick of it. And I have a lot of work to do and I'm very aware of that. I think
that's totally fair. I told you that.
yeah, but I also I think it's just a healthier way of thinking that we can get to a place where it doesn't run our life. I feel so much sadness on a regular basis going, okay, is this is it? This is how I'm going to be. And like having a little bit of hope of going, okay, no, I can be free of this is.
Well, I'll tell you, Shannon Shine, who's an amazing OCD advocate, has been doing advocacy for a long time. I had him on a podcast once or a webinar, and I remember asking Shannon, I said, do you consider yourself cured? Do you consider yourself like your OCD's managed? Like, where are you at now? And I loved his response because he said, Liz, I don't care if you want to call it cure or management, whatever makes sense, whatever word doesn't bother me. But I'm at a place where I have zero fear of anything OCD could try to throw at my life. And I thought that was just such a good description of like, that's it, right? Like, freedom doesn't mean you never have a thought. Like you're a human being. Every person has thoughts that give them anxiety. They have fears. They have triggers like that. That happens to anybody. No one's saying that's possible. But imagine again, if your thoughts have no fear attached to them anymore, if your thoughts never become a trigger, if you're able to keep them a thought, to me, that is freedom. And I would say that, like, I totally hear you if you're like, I'm very skeptical of that. And I don't know that that's true because I'm far from it. Of course, like, I want you to be there. I want you to be skeptical. Like, if you weren't skeptical, you probably wouldn't have OCD, right? You would, of course, fix this on your own quickly. But it's about being able to say, like, we're fighting for freedom. We're not going to get to a place where we accept that it always has to be a part of us. Because that's also selling ourselves short, right? That is guaranteeing that we're just keeping anxiety and OCD as a part of our life.
How consistent with ERP do you have to be and how long before you felt free? I think that feels discouraging alone is like, and the severity of OCD matters. And I get that, and lifestyle and stress and managing all of that. But as someone who's in the thick of it, like myself right now, I mean, what does that road look like for me realistically if my goal is freedom?
So our research would tell us that most people need about 12 to 16 sessions of ERP to get to that's a really good dose of ERP. So in as little as 3 to 4 months, if you're doing outpatient, maybe it's different if it's more intensive treatment, you should get to a place where you're really able to manage your symptoms. Maybe like Liam's talked about being at that like 85% or that 70%. That remaining work is kind of yours to do. And I find that like the bulk of ERP with a good clinician should be done pretty quickly, 2 to 3, 4 months at the most. You should really be able to see that huge change and shift and increase. Our research tells us that. We know that. If again, we're treating OCD, we're doing ERP. And after that, how long did it take me? It took me 20 years. So that's not encouraging because I chose to hold on to OCD for 20 years of my life. Like I was functioning with OCD because it's what I thought was the best I could have. It's what I accepted. And also, I wasn't willing to do that remaining work. When I chose to do the remaining work for me was actually when I became a mom and I made the decision of like, I'm not keeping any of this anymore. I'm going to do the remaining stuff to get me to freedom because I have other things to live for. And like, I don't have space and time for this in my life anymore. And
So
how long
the
did it take?
belief,
Not long at all.
belief itself was that remaining piece.
The belief and the willingness, right? Like you have to say, like I always tell our patients here that have OCD left, there's 10, 20, 30, 50%. They know what they need to do to get rid of that remaining percentage. If you've had a good dose of ERP, you know, hey, here's the work that's left. It's making the choice to do it. And like that, nobody can make that choice for you except yourself.
Yeah, can I ask you this? Because this is just for me.
Yeah.
There are definitely intrusive thoughts and rituals that I know I still do and have kept largely secret even from myself. And I'm going to tackle them in this next ERP. And so I'm aware of that. And so that'll help me get some of the way there. But I also find that there are days where I'm just sad and
Yeah.
I
That's me
feel
today.
yeah, and
Like
I
on the
feel
verge
some
of,
level of like mourning of the past and what's been lost. And I'm 41 and my childhood and adolescence was kind of racked by this. And I, I mean, maybe that part of me that's like, I'm never going to be cured from that is that part, like that there will be days that just aren't great. And maybe that's what I'm trying to say when it's like, you have to accept that
yeah.
that it's not going to always be rosy.
Yeah. And that's not OCD. Right? That's like our mental health. Our mental health ebbs and flows every day. Like, we can get news, we can get information that makes us feel a certain way. And sometimes it's a certain way that's great. Sometimes it's a certain way that's terrible. Like,
Hmm.
that's actually a part of just life is that can we learn to be able to tolerate distress and feelings, which means that it's actually good for us to feel different feelings. How boring would it be if every day you felt the same way? Right? Like, it's actually good that we feel good and bad. It's can we tolerate that? Instead of when we feel a little depressed or we feel, yet, yes, there's things we can do that are going to make us more depressed, right? Isolating, staying inside, not getting out of bed. But like, can we feel depressed and acknowledge that and still choose to do something else despite it? But that's not OCD, right? That's our mental health. That's our life. I do think that I think that's a big piece of what we talk a lot about is a lot of patients will say, if I can address my OCD, my life will be better. And that's not always the case, right? Yes, your life's going to be better because you're not going to have OCD, of course. But also now you have to figure out life. And for many of us, we lost 20, 30 years of our life, 40 years of our life to our OCD. Now I have to like redefine it. And there is grief and there is loss and there is feelings associated with it. That's not OCD. That's other feelings that we have to learn to work through. Now, the good news is a CBT framework of like, how do we allow ourselves to feel discomfort and move through it and choose to still live by the behaviors we want to be living by is still going to work. But I wouldn't say that's OCD. What I will say though, Liam, when you said, you still have some intrusive thoughts and rituals to work on, that's great. We want you to work on those. But I also want you to think about like, have you addressed the core fears of why those rituals and intrusive thoughts are still there? So remember when we do ERP, like, and we could do a whole nother episode if y'all want, I would love to on like how to really do ERP mechanically and how to do it all the way to get to freedom. Because what I have learned, and this is my like true clinical view, is that most clinicians actually only know how to do ERP to get people to functioning because they use ERP for symptom management. Okay, give me a list of all the things you avoid and give me a list of the things you're triggered by. Let's do ERP so that's no longer a trigger. So you can touch this item, so you can go out that door and touch the doorknob. But they don't actually figure out what are you actually afraid of? What are you triggered by? What is the core fear that's causing this thing to be contaminated or that you to avoid that door? Because when we do ERP, yes, we're still going to be touching the things that scare us. That's exposures. We're going to do response prevention. We're not going to wash our hands or whatever your ritual is that you do. We also need to be leaning into what we're actually afraid of so that it can have this domino snowball effect and not be, man, my whole life I have to do ERP for everything that triggers me.
Oh, I can tell you already what my deep down fear is, and it's that I'm a piece of shit.
So that's what we have to work on with ERP.
Where does that come from?
Yeah. So what we don't do with OCD treatment is like, we're not going to do as much of like, is this belief like something that happened in childhood? Sometimes, right, there is stuff to do, but it's really of like, okay, so how, Liam, could I do exposures with you that are going to be triggering exposures and response prevention, but then actually have you saying things like, and I'm worthy of an amazing life, and I can't wait to see what unfolds, right? Where we can take that fear, not lean into it in a negative way of like, oh, and I'm a piece of shit and I'm probably not going to get what I want. That's what people think ERP is. That's not ERP, you guys. That's fear factor, worst case scenario. That makes you feel more depressed. It makes you feel more hopeless. That's not what ERP is. It is not, I'm afraid I'm a pedophile, so let me write statements about being a pedophile and lean into the fact that that's what I am. No, that's not good treatment. We don't do that anymore. We don't need to do that. It's how can I do the things that trigger me, so face the things you're avoiding, but also lean into my fears in a values-based way, right? So instead of leaning into the worst case fears, I actually want you to be like, yeah, and I'm excited to see what kind of life I'm going to get to build, or I can't wait for this person to get to know my heart. And I bet you would tell me that might be even more triggering because that feels fake, or that doesn't feel real, or that would, and it's like, yeah, great. That's the point.
It would feel more triggering to me.
Interesting.
Because it would feel fake.
Exactly.
Yeah, same.
And this is what happens. And this is what happens with scrupulosity. People will think that the scrupulosity, right, religious form of OCD, that when we do the work, we're going to have you, if your fear is like not going to heaven, we're going to have you lean into not going to heaven. No, actually, I'm going to have you do the things you're avoiding. And then I'm going to have you be like, and I can't wait to get to heaven one day. And I can imagine how beautiful a place heaven is. And they're like, but that's even harder because that feels triggering. Good. I want it to be harder.
So it's trusting the belief of the thing we feel that feels fake over and over again to the point where then it doesn't feel fake. I mean, at some point, right?
It depends, right? This is where everybody's core fears are different. So we need to figure out like, what are the things you're avoiding? How do we create exposures with response prevention? And then how do we lean into your core fears? And for some people, it feels fake. For some people, it just feels really scary. For some people, it feels like impossible, or there's no way they could tolerate that feeling of guilt or shame, right? We have to figure out what is that core fear to then be able to tailor it specifically.
Got it.
Well, Dr. Liz McIngvale, like I said, we could talk to you forever, and now you're just doing therapy on Alicia and me, which we love. Love a free session.
Anytime.
I know. I need another round of this when I'm in a better headspace. I told Liam before, I'm like, I thought of 100 ways to cancel on you guys this morning. It's like my brain was like, not today, not today. And I didn't show up, but thank you for showing up. That was great. And I know the listeners will gain a lot from that. So thank you for that.
Well, thank y'all for having me. I, can't say enough just how much I appreciate the education and advocacy and work you guys are doing, because getting the message out there and the right message is what's going to really make a difference. So thank you.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for listening to another episode of the OCD Confessional. Be sure to follow this show so you get new episodes. You can subscribe to us on YouTube or find us on Instagram and TikTok at the OCD Confessional.